Okay, so you are super busy this year. You don't have time to see how Oakland matches up with Kentucky or whether they could be the 4 team that pulls the upset on the number 3 seed. What about UConn? Are they really that good? Oh, and then there are other underrated 2 through 5 seeds that could be the value picks of the year, and you have zero clue on who those teams might be. You have absolutely nothing to worry about because college basketball expert Thomas Casale is here to help guide you through March Madness, and he's coming up next on the Dattitude podcast.
If you're looking for the latest scoop and in-depth interviews on the Saints, the NFL, the Pelicans, LSU, along with the best bets of the week, then lucky you. Along with high-powered, in-the-know guests who cover our teams, Jim Derry brings plenty of Dattitude. And he'll always tell you the way it is, or at least the way he thinks it is.
Where you at, New Orleans? And hello to all my friends elsewhere, everywhere out there who somehow, some way have just learned that their brackets have been busted. Damn it. Didn't even start yet. It's got to be a new record or something. Anyway, this is Dattitude episode number 216 for a Monday, March the 18th, 2024. I am your host, Jim Derry, and whether you are watching on one of our NOLA.com social media channels or listening to the podcast, as always, I thank you of being part of the show and being part of the Dattitude family. Coming up in about 10 minutes or so, we'll be joined by college basketball expert Thomas Casale, who is also the sports betting director at bet.nola.com. Look, I'm not just saying expert. I said this yesterday on a short. I'm telling you, Thomas has been ridiculous with his college basketball picks on well, he also does some work for Sportsline, and I'm telling you, on Sportsline, I think it's something absurd. Like, he's made 23, his last 23 picks, I think he's 20-3, something along those lines for Sportsline. And I'm not talking about, like, you know, some teams minus 500 and he's picking a money line like a lot of people at Sportsline do. We were joking about this last week. No, he's legit. Like, he's picking all sorts of things, and we're going to have him on. He's going to talk about some of his sleepers, all sorts of things. His sleepers, can UConn repeat? Will UConn repeat? He had some futures. I'm gonna let him tell you who they were. But he had one future that he picked after the tournament last year that was 100-1. That's got a shot, like a legit shot. Then he picked one other one before this season started that I think was somewhere along 60-1. And not only do they have a legit shot, but I think they're a 2 seed. So that's coming up. All of that. Before we get to Thomas, I'm going to have a mini rant about the Saints and who that's on social media chiming in on the Justin Fields trade and whether their favorite team should have gotten in on the action. We're going to have fun with that. You people who don't like when I disagree with you, you might want to turn me off for 5 minutes or so because, look, if you think the Saints should have got in on the Justin Fields situation and you don't want to hear about how you're wrong, I'm just telling you, you might want to come back in about 7 minutes or so when Tom comes on. But you do want to hear Tom. I'm just telling you that. We're also going to talk about the LSU women. Did the NCAA selection committee do them dirty, making them a 3 seed, putting them in the same bracket as Iowa? I tell you what, I won't make you wait on that. The answer is yes. It's crappy what they did. It really is. But there's a reason why. More on that coming up. Lastly, we will wrap up the show today. We're talking a little bit about the Pelicans. They actually had a good weekend, not just because they won, but some other things happened. The Clippers got blasted by the Hawks yesterday. Those standings, we'll show those to you, show you where the Pelicans are. Just 1 month left before the playoffs begin. We're going to talk about that. And in the extra point today, Scottie Scheffler. If you're not a huge golf fan and somehow you don't know the name Scottie Scheffler, or you only sort of know it, get familiar with it because he did something yesterday that no other golfer has ever done. Actually, there were a few things that he did that no other golfer's ever done. He could soon be on the same plane as Tiger Woods, Jack Nicklaus, Arnold Palmer. Yes, I'm telling you, it's true. Very soon he could be there. going to talk about that. Before we get to all that, before we get to my dime, we'll remind you, if you're watching live, you can join in by typing your comment or question. No matter what platform you are watching or listening to, you can type it in as long as you're watching live, obviously. If you're listening after the fact, or you have us on your podcast on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast, you can send in a comment via email at jderry@theadvocate.com or on X/Twitter, whatever you want to call it. You can find me on Jim Derry Jr., at Jim Derry Jr., I should say. And a reminder, if you haven't done so yet, politely as I can do anyway, I'll ask you to subscribe to the Dattitude YouTube page and click the little bell to receive notifications whenever we go on the air live. We've got a comment. What am I doing here? I'm already messing up. Josh is saying that Thomas can't miss. You're right. He can't miss. All right, before we get to Tom, I have gotten my dime. I always like to open Mondays with Derry's dime. I don't always do it when it's not football season. I do it every Monday during football season. I'm kind of like hit or miss when it's not football season. But I had something to say this morning. So before we get to Tom, I'm gonna get you what I think. This morning we're talking about Justin Fields being traded to the Pittsburgh Steelers for a pack of hot dogs, a free month of car washes for the McCaskey family, and don't forget this one's important, a $100 Amazon gift card. That's what, look, I mean, sometimes you use those things. They're worth it. But some Saints fans are wondering why their team did not get in on the action. There's a simple answer. They just can't get it through their heads that Derek Carr is the starting quarterback for this football team as long as Dennis Allen is the head coach. Now, many of you out there are saying, well, that'll only be like 10 months or less. But realistically, you are very likely incorrect and have trouble facing reality. How many times do we have to say on this show, the Saints are loyal to a fault? And how many times do I have to hear the same people say, I'm done with this team. No, for real this time. I made my thoughts clear on Dennis Allen. The difference between me and many of you is that I hope I'm wrong. I hope he succeeds. I am not a masochist. I don't want to be miserable from September to January. I want the team to succeed, which means I want Allen to succeed. It also obviously means that I want Derek Carr to succeed. Beyond that, I will also restate that Derek Carr has received way too much of the blame for the mediocrity of the Saints have subjected their fans to. Remember when I said that Carr was can be a top 10 quarterback with a solid offensive line? Well, he was a top 10 or a top 12 quarterback last year without one. We can only hope that O-line is where this team goes at the top of next month's draft. As for Fields, what in the world would he do here? I agree the Bears made a big mistake, but we all know that's what the Bears do. They haven't done much right since they let Buddy Ryan go like 38 years ago. Will Caleb Williams be a big enough improvement in value compared to Fields against what they would have received with a trade of the number one pick? I doubt it. But again, as far as the Saints, why would anyone want a worse situation than the team had here with Jameis Winston backing up Carr? A number two quarterback is not going to play, period. Not unless Carr has to have his spleen removed in season or his right arm amputated. The way this team is currently set up, they're simply better off to have no quarterback controversy and no one asking for the backup to get playing time. Although I'm sure some of you goofballs will still ask for that, no matter who the backup is, no matter how well Carr is playing. Oh, and just in case you're wondering or holding out hope the Saints will draft a potential starting quarterback next month, stop it. Just stop it. Derek Carr is your starting quarterback for a minimum of the next 2 years and likely beyond. If you can't accept that, I'm sure the Washington Commanders and Carolina Panthers still have room on their bandwagons. And that's my dime. Look, I'm not trying to beat a dead horse, but I saw it all over social media this week, and especially with some people that I actually respect, and there's just some people out there that just can't stand Derek Carr. They can't stand Dennis Allen, and they're just not going to give them any credit. They're going to wish for their teams to lose. How long are we going to go through this is my question. How long are we going to ask fans out there to stop saying, I hope my team loses. Why in the world would anyone hope their team loses? It doesn't do anyone any good. I'm still seeing it. I'm seeing it now. We're talking about in March. I'm not talking about back in November when the Saints were, 4-7 or 4-6 or whatever the hell they were. I mean, I'm talking about right now. This is what people are hoping for. They're still saying this. I saw it all over Twitter this weekend, and I don't understand it. So, again, look, you want your team to do as well as they can because you want to have fun with it. You want to go through the line. You want to go across the line. You want the team to be successful, and you want to have fun with the season. I mean, are you going to be rooting there on September the 8th or 9th or whatever the hell the opening day is against whoever they play? What if they play the Falcons? Are you going to really realistically root for your team to lose? No. Are you going to root against Derek Carr because you hate Derek Carr? No. Are you going to root against Derek Allen because you hate Dennis Allen because you hate Dennis Allen? No. It just doesn't make sense. So, look, I know it's early to talk about this. Look, here's Brandon. He says, Saints win. Exactly. That's the point. You want the Saints to win. It's more fun when the Saints win. It really is. So we're waiting on Tom to show up in the green room, and as soon as he does, we're going to put him on. But, what do you think out there? What do you think? You can let me know. We do have Thomas Casale in the green room. We're going to put him on here. What is happening this morning?
Hey, how's it going?
It's going good. It's going good. I'm sure for you, I read a tweet that you put out about a week or two ago, and you said you pulled your car into the driveway or into the garage, and you don't expect to pull it out of the garage again until April.
Correct. Yes, this is my busy couple weeks here. It's always a lot of fun, but it's I won't be getting much sleep until April.
Well, I appreciate you taking time to come out because I know you're dissecting things. You got a lot of shows to go on to. You do some work for some other outlets, and I went on to Sportsline yesterday evening. I think I was looking 20. Are you 20-3 or something along those lines? Your last 23 picks?
Yeah, my last 23. I'm 20-3 heading into the tournament. So
that's insane.
Listen, it's good, but the tournaments, we start over again. It's a different kind of handicap. It's different kind of matchups. There's 3 stages to college basketball betting. There's the regular season, then you got to reset for conference tournaments because those are familiar opponents on neutral courts. That to me is the toughest time to handicap games. And then you go to the tournament, which is unfamiliar teams on neutral court. So, it's interesting. College basketball, I always joke, is it's an interesting sport because by the time everybody starts betting it, that's the hardest time to bet on college basketball. But when it's the easiest time, football's king. Jim, everybody's still betting on football.
There's zero doubt about that. Well, I am telling people out there, and I'm not just saying this. I've got a few friends now who are like following you religiously, and I know a couple of them are at least one of them here is going to comment in just a little bit when we really get into it. But they've been winning money following you ever since I told them about it. So see, even though they stink in poker, a couple of these guys, they benefit by sitting, near me, and because I'll tell them some secrets, and Tom Casale is one of those secrets. All right, look, all joking aside, I do want to get into the bracket. So what we're going to do here is we're going to spend about 80% of our time talking about, we're going to go in depth on the 4 brackets. And what I want you to do is I want you to tell me maybe who is a sleeper in the first round. Who do you like as a sleeper in the first round? It could be a 10 against a 7, whatever you think. Who is a sleeper in the bracket? Maybe not who you think's going to win that bracket, but someone who you think is a good value in the bracket. And then we'll finish by who you think is going to win the bracket. Now, first, before we get to that, number 1 seeds, what did you think of the number 1 seeds? Let's talk about the men first. What did you think of the number 1 seeds, and especially North Carolina? Did you think North Carolina deserved that 4th number 1 seed?
I did. I thought it was close between North Carolina and Iowa State. I have futures on both teams, so I like them both. But if the committee sometimes, from football, Jim, they can talk in circles at times.
Yeah.
But there's one thing that if you looked at the committee over the last few years, they are dead set on, and that's playing non-conference. Iowa State non-conference schedule was a joke. I mean, they're beating teams by 50, 60 points. So when I looked at that, I thought that was going to be the deciding factor, and I think that's what it was.
Yeah, I hear you, and I'm definitely not as knowing this year in college basketball as I usually am this time of year. I don't know if it's because I got stuck on football for so long or needed a break and took my break too long or what the heck the deal was. But it wasn't as easy for me to get back into it. Although I will say I did enjoy a lot of these conference tournaments were fun to watch. And I'm talking about all of them, like the mid-majors and everything. It was fun to watch. Even the Ivy League. Boy, was that a crazy finish.
Yeah, no, we were actually rooting for Brown.
Wow.
Yeah, I was just watching with my son, and he was rooting for Brown, and boy, they really let one slip away. But I think what you're saying is where we're going in college basketball, and we saw it last year. We had one dominant team, which you don't see a lot in UConn, and they're still pretty dominant. But the other three Final Four teams were sleepers. You know, they were San Diego State, Florida Atlantic,
Right.
and Miami. I think the transfer portal has impacted college basketball differently than football. These teams are closer together than ever. Yes, you have your UConns and you know your Houstons. You have a couple that stand out, but top to bottom in this tournament, I think it's going to be crazy, and it makes it harder to pick the brackets because there's going to be quite a few upsets. You got to hope you pick the right ones if you're looking to win brackets.
How have the odds adjusted to what you're talking about and potentially an 8 or a 9 seed making the Final Four, which is obviously something we hadn't seen since Villanova beat Georgetown way back in the day?
Yeah,
or at
and
least
you don't
make it to the championship game, not so much make the Final Four.
Yeah, you don't get quite as much value as you used to. And I'll tell you where you don't get any value anymore. You know, 15, 20 years ago, you used to bet dogs in the tournament, and the lines you used to get were phenomenal. Now the public bets dogs. It's rare. It's one of the only times in the whole betting season that the public likes underdogs, and it's in the NCAA tournament because that's why. Listen, they can change football all they want. Football's a giant, right? It's massive. I don't care what they do to football. The appeal to the NCAA tournament is the little guy, right? It's the upset. It's think of the terms we used during this time: Cinderella, right? Bracket buster. So you don't get value anymore in the first round. I'm waiting on some of these lines. They keep dropping. I think there's going to be value on some of these favorites.
Oh, I'm going to be looking for that, and I'm going to be picking your brain. Before we go, move on to the regions, UConn and South Carolina, UConn and the men and South Carolina and the women, they've obviously the dominant favorites here. Do you think when all is said and done that those are the teams that we're going to see at least in the championship games?
I think with both of those teams, they have to lose as much as the other team has to win.
Right.
If these two teams show up and play their best, nobody's beating them.
I agree.
No one's beating UConn if they're on top. I'll tell you what, one of the best games I saw all year from a team was St. John's in the Big East tournament against UConn, and they trailed by 10 with 2 minutes to go. That's how good UConn is when they're on. Nobody in the country was beating UConn that day. They were on their A game. And it's a shame because St. John's, to me, was the one team I wish had gotten in because I thought they were the best bubble team. But that's how good UConn is. And listen, we've seen South Carolina. LSU's played them good twice. And, when they're playing their game, no one's going to beat them.
16 straight losses LSU has to South Carolina women's basketball. And I know they get a chance. I know they hope they get a chance to break the streak, or even if they were to lose 17 in a row this year, it wouldn't be that big of a deal because it'd be in the national championship game. We'll talk about the women at the end of this. All right, let's get into the brackets here, and we'll start off with the East. And obviously the monster is in the East, and that's where UConn went. I don't see, a potential matchup with Auburn to me is interesting. But one thing I read this morning, and I didn't realize until I read it, they really kind of loaded this bracket. You're talking about conference champions. The top 4 are major conference champions in UConn, Iowa State, Illinois, and Auburn, all conference champions. I found that interesting. Why would they do that?
Yeah, when I wrote up last night the bracket previews for NOLA.com, I mentioned that this is this year's Region of Death. And I think a couple of things. I think they knew that they needed to put some strong teams in there with UConn, or it's going to be, they're just going to roll, right? And so when you look at these 3 teams, Iowa State, you could have argued for a 1.
Right.
Illinois is a solid 3, but Auburn, I mean, listen, Auburn's been good all year. That was the one surprise in seeding for me, was that they were a 4. I thought they were going to be a solid 3. So not only do you have quality teams, you have teams that could have been seeded a little higher. So this to me is UConn's the best 1 seed, but this is the toughest road for any 1 seed.
Interesting matchup potentially as well. Auburn against San Diego State. I think that could be a really fun matchup early on in this tournament.
Yeah, and Auburn's a type of team they're going to be. Auburn has 2 really positives if you're looking at them making a run at UConn. One, they're deep. They have players coming in and out all over the place, right? They could wear you down. The other is they're extremely physical. That's what, if you're not physical against UConn, don't bother getting off the bus. So if you're looking for, in my opinion, listen, I like Iowa State, right? I like their team. But if you're talking about pure matchups with UConn, I think Auburn, if the UConn's going to lose, it'll be Auburn who gets them.
Before you came in the green room, I was talking about you had a couple teams. One you bet after last year's tournament, and I think you said 100-1. But I know you got Iowa State before the season began as a future. What did you get them at? 60-1.
I got Iowa State and Florida both at 100-1, and I have Carolina at 30-1. I also have Michigan State at 16-1, but we don't need to talk about that one.
Well, Iowa State at 101, talking about a 2 seed. I mean, if you get the 1-2 matchup now again, we're looking way ahead. You got to get to the Elite 8 for that to possibly happen for this region champion. What about Iowa State thinks? Would you think they would have a chance to get to UConn?
Well, they're a tough matchup because the way they play defensively, they pressure the ball, they create turnovers, they get easy baskets. We saw that in the Big 12 tournament when their defense is at its peak. They're a very tough matchup for teams. If they were to play UConn, see, the problem with Iowa State, there's a couple teams I think that are similar. Iowa State, Houston, maybe even Auburn. They got to avoid a 52-point game. Iowa State's better offense. Tennessee is another. Tennessee's offense is miles better than it's been in years past. So I don't even want to put them in that class anymore. But Iowa State, they got to avoid that game where they're 2 for 18 from 3. If they can do that, I think they can get to UConn. And then the type of game they're going to want to play is instead of playing that transition kind of game, because UConn will kill them in transition, they're going to want to play one of those games where they bog it down. That's where they want their 58-55 game. They played that with Houston earlier in the year. They're going to want to play that because any team that runs with UConn, I don't care if it's Alabama, I don't care if it's Arizona, I don't care if it's Purdue, they're going to be on the losing end of that.
I got a question from Josh who says, what's your thoughts on teams not ranked in the preseason at all, but get a 1 or 2, never winning it at all? Iowa State this year, Purdue last year. What do you think about that?
I think so. One of the things like people will always bring up, like I just go by what I see this year. And to me, Tennessee is one of the best teams. Now, obviously, everyone's going to bring up, Rick Barnes never wins. I understand that. Okay, so my argument's going to be this. Last year, we heard the same thing about San Diego State, right? So San Diego State went to overtime in round 1. Then they got Furman, who they matched up great with. The key to the tournament is winning those first 2 games, getting out of there and getting to the Sweet 16. Virginia won a national championship. Virginia, okay? I understand narratives that this team can't do this and this team can't do that, but every year is different. And when you get past those first 2 games and you get to that second weekend, then it becomes all about matchups. That first game a lot of times is getting used to the arena. Yeah, it's travel. There's all kinds of variables in that first game that you got to overcome. And I've mentioned this a bunch of times. The three of the 4 Final Four teams last year, San Diego State, Florida Atlantic, and Miami, all should have lost the first round game. They were all losing late in those games, and they found a way to win and then went on to the Final Four.
Yeah, by the way, with Virginia, they also lost as a 1 seed too. So not that I like to rub it in.
Right, but I'm just saying
I'm kidding.
Virginia's style does not, to me, equal success in the NCAA tournament. I think it's good for the regular season. They can, lock teams down. But that one year, they had a couple guys who could shoot. They had an NBA prospect, and they won a game they probably should have lost, and they ended up winning the national championship. Very few times are you going to see what UConn did last year, and that's blowing the doors off everybody.
I'm kidding. I like to poke fun at the ACC whenever I get a chance to. I have a little fun doing it. All right, before we move on, out of this East bracket, obviously UConn is the favorite. I want you to give me a first-round matchup you're really looking at and a potential for an upset in the first round from one of these 8 games.
Well, my favorite bet in round 1 is right here. I like Drake over Washington State.
Okay.
They opened 1.5-point underdogs. Listen, I'm not always right on the lines. This one, I knew by this morning Drake would be favored, and they are now at most books 1.5. Drake's the number 1 defensive rebounding team in college basketball. They shoot the 3 well. They don't turn the ball over. To me, the Pac-12 is the worst conference in America. Legitimately, they got 2 teams in. They got Washington State and Arizona. Colorado was one of the last 4 in. I think they got lucky, and Oregon needed to win the conference tournament. Washington State really need to get offensive rebounds, and I think Drake can negate that. And I just think Drake's the better team. So I think they're gonna upset Washington State in round 1 seed wise. Now they're the slight favorite.
How do you avoid? That reminds me of a question I wanted to ask. How do you avoid? One thing about Drake is I know that Drake is also popular among a lot of other media experts, and you start seeing in brackets, then Drake will be like 54%. You know what I'm saying? It's like, so how do you avoid those things? I guess you just have to pick if that's what you think is going to happen. But, I always hate that going into a tournament. There are many years when I think I like so-and-so, that's a 10 or 11 seed, but then you get on and so does everybody else. I mean, do you try to avoid those, or do you pick against, do you stay away from those?
Well, here's the thing. This year, Drake isn't the sexy pick. I think this is an even basketball game, so I'm not surprised some people like Drake. Last year, the 2 sexy picks were Kent State against Indiana, who they never really had a chance, and Drake against Miami. I thought Drake-Miami was even. I thought the team that won that game could make a run. And again, Drake led by 8 with 2 minutes to go. They blew it. So, this year, I think your sexy picks are going to be McNeese State.
For sure.
A lot of people like McNeese State. It's only like a 6-point spread. Everything's got to go right for you. So I think that I think to me, when you get those sexy picks like that, that hurts the spread. And to forget about winning or losing, like McNeese State, Samford's going to be the other one, right? Like it's, I'm trying like heck not to bet Kansas. I really am, because I don't like Kansas. But at some point, that line's probably going to get so low, I might have to bite. So I would say that. I don't think Drake is necessarily the sexy pick they were last year. I think they got a good draw because Washington State's probably one of the weakest Power 5 teams in the tournament.
Second consecutive sports betting director at bet.nola.com to dislike Kansas. Although the other one went to Mizzou, so he has of course he hates Kansas. That's a whole nother story. Another question for you. I'm going to ask you with each region is what obviously Iowa State has a chance. We talked about them, but maybe beyond the 1 and 2 seeds, what team do you think could find a way to make a run and somehow make an upset run to the Final Four?
Yeah. I'll say this. If you're looking for a sleeper, like if you don't like to take 1 seeds, this probably is not the region to do it. There's better options in the regions we're going to come in. But I will say this. The one team that's interesting that to me has the biggest gap on what can happen to them in the tournament is BYU, simply because of the way they shoot the 3. They're second in college basketball on 3 points attempted per game, but they also rebound well. They're top 60 in both offense and defensive rebounding. So if they start hitting their shots, if they get on a run, they got Duquesne early. I think they get by that. And I'll say this, their second round matchup is a good one. If it's Illinois struggles to cover the 3-point shot. That's going to be a crazy game. It's going to be back and forth. It's going to be a lot of points. Then if they win that, it's Iowa State, who they have familiarity with. They've played twice this year, and BYU beat them by 15, then lost by 6 at Iowa State. Losing by 6 at Iowa State's more impressive than the 15-point a win at home because Iowa State kills everybody at home. So I think that would be the team, if you're looking, is interesting.
I know who you'll be rooting for if it's BYU and Iowa State. It won't be BYU, I'm assuming.
No.
And look, I assume you're going to pick UConn to come out of this region.
Yeah, I'd like to pick somebody else, but to me, I think if UConn loses, it will be in the Final Four. I think you will get to the other region, that they'll have to play. But there's a couple teams in that other region I think can compete with them in a one-game situation.
Right.
I think the one team here that you're going to want to look at, like I said, is Auburn. If they get by Auburn, they're going to win this region.
All right, let's move on to the West, and we're kind of going along with the left side of the bracket here. Interesting bracket, and this is one of those brackets, I think, just looking at it on the periphery, I think almost any, obviously I'm not talking about like New Mexico or Howard or Nevada or something like that, but I think that there are so many teams that could come out of this bracket.
Yeah, this to me is the most interesting bracket. I've been a Carolina fan all year for a couple of reasons. I think what happened last year has set up this season. They're a completely different team. They rank 6th in defense. If you watch their defense last year and I told you they were going to be a top 6 defense this year, you'd have laughed in my face. They're playing with more effort. They're playing with more intensity. And what I like about North Carolina, it's an underrated thing, but they can win multiple ways in games. Like BYU has to make threes. If they don't, good night. North Carolina has shown they can play fast, they can play slow. So I like that adaptability they have. But this, to me, like you said, there's 4 or 5 teams you could see coming out of it. I think this region could be crazy. I think you could see upsets. I think you could see higher seeds get knocked out. Even Carolina, the second round game, Mississippi State will pound with them. They are physical. That's a tough matchup. And Michigan State, I mean, listen, you never know. The preseason top 10, we don't know what we're going to see in the tournament.
Mississippi State played so well, I thought, in the SEC tournament. And, when they just beat the doors off of LSU, I was like, But they proved that it wasn't just that one game. Gabe says he has a weird gut feeling about Long Beach State beating Arizona. He says he won't pick it, but the feeling is there.
Listen, it's an amazing story. Sometimes things happen in sports that you can't explain. They fire their coach on Monday, and then on Saturday they make the NCAA tournament. That's something that
Steve Fisher-esque.
Listen. They're not gonna win. They ain't going to the Elite Eight, but Arizona's a team that you watch them. They're a head scratching team. Sometimes you watch them and you're like, this is the best team in the country. Nobody's beating them. Then you'll watch them the next night and you'd be like, they're going out in round 1. The game against Oregon in the Pac-12 tournament looked like they didn't even want to be there. Yeah. So we have to know what Arizona team shows up. The only thing that makes me nervous about an upset here is Arizona got it last year. That's one of my things. When a team gets upset the year before, it's, we saw it with Virginia, right? They lost as a 1 seed, like Purdue's not losing this year to a 1. We know that they're going to be focused. So that would be my only cause of concern with Arizona getting beat.
Although we've seen historically that Arizona has been in situations like this before. Last year wasn't the first time. I mean, Arizona has been in situations before where they've lost. All right, give me your first round upset pick that you like the most.
Yeah, there's some good games here. Listen, a lot of people like Charleston, and I'm anti-Alabama. Here's the problem I have with Charleston, and it's a theory I use in the NCAA tournament. They're going to play the exact same style as Alabama with less talent. They're going to run up and down the court with Alabama. That's Alabama's game. I'm waiting to see if that line drops a little bit. I actually think the Tide end up blowing this team out. That running with Alabama is different if you're Kentucky and Charleston. That's a big difference. And I don't see it there for Charleston. A lot of people like New Mexico. They're the favorites now. They have great guards. I don't think they should really be a 2.5-point favorite, though. The team I'll say to watch out for here is Nevada. They play ugly. They play a tough defensive style. I don't love the Mountain West in general, but the team that gets by this Dayton, Nevada game, I think could give Arizona a lot of trouble. So I think Nevada is an interesting first round, and Grand Canyon.
I was
To
going to
me,
say Grand Canyon. I was going to ask you about them.
That's interesting because
although I really like St. Mary's though, so it's hard to,
I do. St. Mary's to me. So this is one of those things where I'm going to wait. Like, say if St. Mary's plays Alabama in round 2, I'm going to unload on the Gales if they get by Grand Canyon, because that's the type of game they'll slow Alabama down. They'll frustrate the heck out of them. They'll guard the 3. But this first game's interesting because the way to beat St. Mary's is to pressure the ball handlers and to compete on the boards. Grand Canyon does both. They get out, they create turnovers, they get easy buckets, because you can't play St. Mary's half court all night long.
Right.
They're gonna put the vice grip on you. You got to create easy buckets, and they're also a phenomenal rebounding team. So I didn't get the line I liked there. Again, Grand Canyon's one of those sexy picks. It's 4.5. There's just no value for me, but I do think they have a shot to pull the upset.
Got a question before I ask you about the region underdog. Josh also asking, what are your thoughts on the high offensive pace teams, Arizona, Bama, and Kentucky, facing slower pace teams like Daytona and St. Mary's? Do you prefer the high paced or slow paced play?
It depends how the matchup goes. I do think there's some opportunities here for teams to frustrate other teams, like we just said. Like, I think St. Mary's would beat Alabama, because what you look at with that is when you're looking at high-paced teams, Alabama plays zero defense. So St. Mary's issue is what sometimes? Scoring points. They're not going to have any problem scoring against Alabama, and they're going to have that defensive edge in that matchup will be one of the greatest defensive edges in the history of the NCAA tournament. So that to me is a great, great spot to take the slow team. And the other one you mentioned too, the winner of that Dayton, Nevada game, I think Arizona's got to be a big upset alert. Those are the type of teams that give Arizona problems. So like I said, like when you're going to run with a team like Alabama and Kentucky, you better have as much talent as Alabama and Kentucky, or sooner or later, they're going to run you off the court.
What upset pick do you like here to get out of the West region? We're going to exclude North Carolina and Arizona and maybe even Baylor, because I actually kind of like Baylor in this region a little bit. But if you wanted to pick someone that was not in those top 2 or 3 seeds, who do you like?
Yeah, I think Mississippi State's interesting. I do. The way they play, one of the things that I try to do is I don't put too much stock on how these teams went in their conference. That's a battle every night. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like Mississippi State has to play Bama, Kentucky, Florida every night. When you get out of the conference, I like teams that create matchup problems. And Mississippi State to me is a team, if they get by, there's a coin toss game in round 1. I don't know who's going to win that game. But if they get by Michigan State, they can compete. And as somebody who has, I'll put it this way, as somebody who has a North Carolina futures at 30-1, I'm hoping Michigan State wins that game, because Carolina wiped the floor with them, I think. Mississippi State brings a different kind of challenge to them that I don't necessarily like. So if they were to get out of that, then you're looking at St. Mary's or Alabama, right? They can beat Alabama, and St. Mary's and Mississippi State, it'll be the first team to 42 wins the game. So if you're looking for a sleeper, I think the Bulldogs are interesting.
What team's going to win the West?
I went with North Carolina. Those are the 2 1 seeds. I went with UConn and North Carolina. I've liked the team all year. I bet them, but I'm not as confident as I was with UConn. I think, if you want to make an argument for Arizona, if you want to make an argument for Baylor, the only team I don't think, if you're trying to make an argument for, I would buy is Alabama. Their defense just not good enough to make the Final Four, but there's a bunch of teams here who can get there. And again, I think if you're looking for a region that's going to have a lot of wild March Madness stuff, this is going to be it.
Real quick before we move on to the South, Gabe wants to know what you think about a potential Baylor-Arizona matchup.
That'll be one of the best games of the tournament. It really will. It'll be up and down. I haven't looked.
That won't be 42-40.
No, that will not be 42-40. I haven't looked into the matchup yet, but if Baylor gets by the New Mexico Clemson winner, if they win those two games, the Colgate, that they're terrible. They're not even close to the Colgate team that we've seen in years past, and that conference is awful. They'll win that game. If they get by Clemson, New Mexico, I think Baylor's going to be dangerous. I'd probably be on the Bears in that matchup.
All right, let's move on to the South. And, Houston has been playing as well as anybody. I think a lot of people, or a lot of experts, quote unquote experts, are looking to potentially Houston versus UConn. I mean, that's so far away. And you're talking about 1 versus 1. But some interesting teams in here. Duke at number 4 is interesting to me. You talk about Florida at number 7. Can they play as well as they play in the tournament, at least until the championship game anyway? And some other teams in here. Just what is your overall thoughts about the South?
I think it's a really good region, especially that bottom region where you got Kentucky, you got Florida, you got Marquette. That's going to be there's going to be some good games down there. I think Houston second round, they want Nebraska for sure, because A&M can be physical with them. They can hit the boards with them. So I think they'll roll Nebraska. I think they'll have more issues with A&M. The first round game I'm most interested in watching, and I let out a son of a when the matchups came out because I wanted to bet both teams, James Madison and Wisconsin. Those were two teams I had going to the Sweet 16, and they're playing each other in round 1. Listen, Duke better be careful. Duke does not have 2 easy games here. They have Vermont, who is one of those better lower mid-major teams that has a lot to like. They'll probably get by him, but it's going to be an interesting game. And then that second game, Wisconsin or James Madison, both present issues for Duke. So that's the game I think if you're looking for just to watch, it's going to be a heck of a game.
It's always hard to pick a team called the Catamounts. I'm just saying. I'm always a fan of a team with a really solid nickname, and it's the Catamounts that I'm a big fan of. Look, I don't know what you think of Oakland, but Kentucky should, to me, no matter how long they're in this tournament, should be on upset watch.
Yeah, Oakland. I'll be honest. I tweeted this out yesterday. Oakland to me was a 14 seed that I really liked. They have a bunch of positives. They played one of the toughest non-conference schedules, and they competed with a lot of those teams. They can shoot, they can rebound. I just didn't like the draw with Kentucky because Oakland's got to try to keep up with them now. And whatever you want to say about Kentucky, they score 90 a game. They're hard. They're just a hard team to play. I was hoping for maybe a Illinois or a Baylor with Oakland, but I don't think that, to me, that's something I might look for an Oakland team total there, or maybe a first half bet. I do think as the game goes on, though, Kentucky will eventually wear them down.
What about a potential matchup with Texas Tech or NC State?
Yeah, listen, that's a tough matchup to gauge because both teams, what they do poorly, the other team does well.
Yeah.
NC State, I'm Mr. Fade that team that won the tournament that isn't supposed to win the tournament. Mm-hmm. I remember Georgetown a couple of years ago. Right. I couldn't back the Brinks truck up fast enough to bet Colorado. But I will say NC State got a pretty good draw because Texas Tech does not have a lot of size. And, NC State's got that bulldozer who should be playing defensive tackle for the football team, he's just a fun guy to watch. But I think Kentucky gets by either one of those two teams. It's that next game. Personally, I think the winner, if it's Marquette, Florida, I think's the team that goes to the Final Four. Florida's got a lot of defensive issues. I know. I've liked the team all year. I think in the tournament they present some problems with their guards. Them and Kentucky played twice. The 2 games were decided by 5 points. That would be a heck of a matchup. And I think Marquette, if healthy, is going to be coming into this tournament guns a-blazing because they struggled down the stretch without Tyler Kolek. If he comes back, if he's healthy, they're going to be really tough.
Shows you how much better the SEC is than in years past and that they continue to get better. Did you see 2 teams from the SEC, not only in the same bracket, but in the same quadrant of the bracket? So that's something you don't see very often. I'm sure it's happened in recent past, but when you see that, to me, that just shows you how much respect that the SC has gotten. In fact, 3 teams in the South bracket just goes to show you. All right.
And Jim, I'll say real quick though that to me, Kentucky and Alabama are different, and here's why. Kentucky has shown the ability to play defense. They just don't do it all the time.
Right.
Alabama has shown no ability to play defense. We saw Kentucky play Auburn and Tennessee, and they actually played, solid defense in those games. So if I had to pick one of those teams to make a run, it would definitely be Kentucky.
Okay, who is the first round upset winner that you like most?
First round upset is, let me see, who did I take here? I'm going to go with James Madison. That's going to be a great James Madison. I watched them early against Michigan State, and then I saw a couple people, prominent basketball people, mention that it was a fluke. That's before we really knew what these teams were. That was no fluke. James Madison, and I said during that game, if you took their jerseys off, you wouldn't know who was Michigan State and who was James Madison. Now, they're not as deep as those teams. They're not going to go to the Big Ten and, finish third.
Right.
Talking about a one-game situation, their starting 5 is very impressive. And they've lost 3 games all year. They've only lost to 2 teams. They lost twice to Appalachian State. That was a bad matchup for them. I think I have this number. The thing about Wisconsin is this: the number opened too low here at 144.5. People still have this vision of Wisconsin. Wisconsin has shown in the last month they don't mind getting up and down the court with you. I think James Madison's going to get their pace and their tempo in this game. And I think this is going to be a game played in the 70s. So I think James Madison wins a close game and advances.
All right. And we like the over in that one. Okay. What team other than Houston and Marquette? And I kind of like Marquette out of this bracket. I just have a feeling that Houston's not going to make it. I don't know why. But what team other than Houston or Marquette do you give the best shot of making it to the Final Four?
I'm going with Florida. I think when Florida's on, they're a very good team. I do think they will. Listen, they're going to have to score against Marquette because Marquette's going to be able to beat them on the dribble. That's where Florida struggles. One of the team, if you want to know how to beat Florida, they didn't beat them, but Georgia played them 3 times and gave them trouble and scored a lot. You know what Georgia did all game was they didn't even shoot threes. They just beat their guards on the dribble all night long. Now, Florida outscored them, but that's how you're going to beat the Gators. This is the region I decided to take a little bit of a shot. So, I think Florida could get there. It's going to be Marquette's going to be tough, though. If you're looking for a sleeper, I'd say Florida.
Sleeper Florida, who are you going with to win? I mean, that's the value as well. So this is what we try to tell people all the time on this show. And like we did on Bayou Bets, we might tell you a team that is the value and the team that, an upset to watch because you're getting enough value, but that might not be the team who we think is going to win, if that makes any sense to a lot of people. So who is your team to win in the South? And it may be Florida, maybe not. Who is it?
I took Florida just
Okay.
as my surprise pick. But if you're asking me, if you say, hey, listen, I'm more about betting game to game than brackets. If you're out there picking brackets and you're saying, give me the team you really think's going to win, I'd go with Marquette. If Kolek is healthy, this is a dangerous team. They're tough to match up with. I think they probably have too much defense for Florida and Kentucky. They'll run with Kentucky. They don't mind playing that style. So I'd go Marquette.
Sounds good. Let's move on to the final bracket, and that is the Midwest. And obviously Purdue, a worthy number 1 seed. Tennessee, interesting as a 2 seed. What else do you see in this bracket that you like or maybe don't like?
So Tennessee is a team I've liked all year. Again, to me, it's all about getting to the second weekend, and there's an interesting team roaming around here, and it's Texas. When you're looking, Texas to me reminds me of North Carolina a couple of years ago when they were a 9 seed. They didn't really, it wasn't the regular season they wanted. And then they said, hey, listen, we're still one of the 3 most talented teams in the country. Let's go win this thing. And they made the title game. Texas has talent. I don't really like their coach. I don't think they got the right guy there, but not too many teams that are sitting there on the 7 line have 3 elite players like Texas does. So hopefully Virginia doesn't win a game, but who knows? Virginia probably win 2 games. I can't stand watching Virginia play basketball. Hopefully it's Colorado State. I think Texas will get by them. Texas, Tennessee is going to be one of the most interesting second round games to me if it happens.
It always seem like they want to put Rick Barnes against his old team. They just do that. I mean, I don't know why they just always seem to want to do that. I guess it's fun for ratings. Gabe has a question for you. Creighton is an interesting case. What do you think about the Blue Jays?
Yeah, I could see it. To me, this is the region that if you're looking for teams that I don't really like, they're here. Purdue, Gonzaga, Kansas. I don't think those teams have the guard play to win the national championship or make runs. I just don't. So you could see a team like Creighton. The MAC, normally I would say watch out for Akron, but the MAC was really down this year. It just wasn't the same kind of top to bottom league. So I think Creighton will get by that game. And then they probably have too much offense for either South Carolina and Oregon. They might as well just have that game in a steel cage match and just see who walks out of it, because that's the type of game that'll be. And then you're going to get Creighton against either Tennessee or Texas. So, yeah, if you're looking for a team a little bit further down there, not the obvious choice. And I do think Creighton's a little bit undervalued, only because when you talk about the Big East, it's all UConn. And UConn hasn't won at Creighton since, I don't think, 1941. It's been forever. But they beat them again this year. So Creighton has shown they can beat the best team in the country. They're dangerous.
And not only that, Thomas, one thing about Creighton is their experience in the NCAA tournament and the run that they made even last year. I think that gives them a little help that people aren't necessarily talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had them last year at 100-1. I bet that like the night of the Carolina Kansas championship game, they hung a bad number.
I had them at like 26-1 later.
And everyone's going to point to the foul at the end, but here's why Creighton lost that game. They went like 1 for 22 from 3.
Yeah.
And they were leading at the end. So listen, any team that goes 1 for 22 from 3, if you have a chance to win at the end, you're lucky. So, but that's what they got to avoid. They do have nights similar to BYU where the shot's not going down. There's 3 teams in this tournament that Alabama, Creighton, and BYU. If their threes aren't going down, they're not changing anything. They're going to keep shooting and shooting and shooting and shooting, and that can send you home.
All right, I'm contractually obligated because the only Louisiana team in the entire group of 68 is in this bracket. I hate even mentioning the name Will Wade for obvious reasons as someone who went to LSU. But what do you think about McNeese and their chances of going up against Gonzaga? Obviously, not just because they're a 5 seed. This is not the same Gonzaga team that we're used to seeing.
No, I've been anti-Gonzaga all year. I don't think they have the team. I think McNeese got a great draw. This is a team they can beat athletically. They can slow it down. They can pound them down low. As you know, Jim, this isn't a normal McNeese State team. They got transfers from Division I. This is listen. Every pro bettor I know is on McNeese State. I'll just tell you that right now. Everyone's on them. Sometimes that wins. It does. I don't see the value of the betting line. If it was 8.5, 9, then I'm more likely to jump in. I'm not as likely to jump in at this lower number. But if you're looking just matchup wise and you take out the sexy pick and everybody's on McNeese State, they do have a shot in this game.
Will Wade's favorite song apparently is My Adidas. That's a whole different talks there. Well, give me your first round upset pick, and this one's hard because to me there are a lot of potential upset picks. This could be a crazy bracket.
Yeah, it's a popular one, but I'll go with Samford only because we don't know how healthy Kansas is. The problem with college basketball is they'll tell you one thing, but we don't know how injured these guys are. There's no real injury report. Sometimes these coaches will tell you, yeah, he's coming back. Yeah, he's coming back. You never see him again.
Right.
So I know they said, hey, Dickinson and McCullough are playing for sure. But if they're on the fence, even though Samford's a tough team, they're probably going to hold them out in the first round and wait for that second round game and hope they get by Samford. Just because of that, because we don't know how healthy Kansas is and Samford is a tough matchup, But Kansas has no depth. It's weird. It's one of those years where just you look at the talent at Kansas and you said, would you miss a recruiting class? It's an odd Kansas team. So I'll go with Samford to get the first round upset.
Who is your upset? Let's take Purdue and Tennessee out of the mix. If you had to pick one other than those two, who could make it out of this bracket and make it to Phoenix?
I think it's Texas. That's, to me, the most dangerous lower-seeded team in the tournament. Again, they don't always play like they're supposed to play on paper.
Right.
Sometimes they have 14-point leads, and then 10 minutes later, they're down by 6. That's the kind of team they are.
We saw that
and that's
in the
why
conference tournament.
Yeah, and that's why I don't really like the coach. I think might be the problem. But there's always those teams that are that talented that didn't have the year, and then they say, you know what, we get a fresh start. Let's go win this thing, kind of like Major League. Let's go win the whole effing thing.
Yep.
So I think they're dangerous. I think they're dangerous. So if you're looking for a real sleeper in the tournament to make the Final Four, Texas would be my pick.
All right, and then who is your pick to come out of the Midwest?
I went with Tennessee. I think they have one of the top 3 players in college basketball in Connect, and I think they have a. Sometimes, that narrative is out there so much. Sometimes you use it to your advantage.
Right.
I mean, everybody knows. And Tennessee, to be honest, has not done themselves any favors with that narrative because they lost their last 2 games ugly. I'm hoping that when they're on, they're as good as anybody. And the reason I like Tennessee this year is because of the offense. It's not that same old 58, 54 Tennessee kind of team. So give me the Vols.
That would be an interesting Final Four matchup because you'd have Florida against. Well, you picked Marquette. Did you pick Marquette? Right.
Yeah, I took Florida, but my brackets will be in the trash by Saturday. So
all right, well, I opened with my brackets. My bracket's the first bracket ever to be busted before it even started. So that's where I put mine already.
Yeah. So I looked at mine. I looked at mine last night, and I was like, "Wow, these
this is bad." I hate when you say that.
It doesn't even look good.
All right. So real quick to recap, we got UConn playing North Carolina is what Thomas has on one side in Phoenix. On the other side, he's got Marquette playing Tennessee. All right. Give me your final 2 matchup. You got UConn, North Carolina on one side, Marquette, Tennessee. Who's going to play in the national championship game?
I put North Carolina and Tennessee in there. Everyone's going to pick UConn,
right,
and they should probably. But I think Carolina would have a chance against them.
Okay.
So give me North Carolina and Tennessee, and I took North Carolina to win it all. That's the team I've liked all year, so I didn't want to change it now.
Says the man with a Michael Jordan jersey hanging up behind him in the background. Okay, real quickly, I do want to talk about the LSU women, and we talked about the number 1 seeds. Look, there's no question. South Carolina is more of a favorite on the women's side than UConn is in the men. Look, they got upset last year, and like you talked about with Arizona, obviously it wasn't in the first round. But when a team to me like South Carolina, as dominant as they were, loses in the turn, they're going to be so focused. I honestly, and I know I said this last year, but I just don't see them getting beat. I really don't. I don't think they're getting beat. So I think you can go out and bet a little bit on them, even though they're a ridiculous favorite. And I don't bet on ridiculous favorites very often. That being said, LSU, I think what the committee did to LSU was just flat out wrong. And I know it's about ratings, and they're trying to get ratings up, and they want people to watch this tournament. But to put LSU and Iowa in the same bracket, to me, is absurd.
Yeah, and that was the big, everyone was upset about it last night. And I think the ratings are already going to be there because you already have the intrigue. This, to me, it's the most interesting women's tournament ever because you have the most popular female player of all time, and you have maybe the best team of all time. And the just that being on a possible collision course is going to draw so much interest. I don't think they needed to put LSU in there. I don't think it was. I mean, just seed it right. But hey, if they play, I'll be watching. I can tell you that.
Are they that afraid that LSU is going to lose before they would get to the Final Four? Because to me, that'd be the only reason. I mean, I think LSU should have been a 2 seed. It should have been in the bracket below. I got to put them on my glasses to read this, but they're in their Albany 2 bracket. And I think if they would have put them as a 2 seed where Ohio State is and put them in the same bracket with USC, and I know they'd have to travel out west, but who cares? I mean, Louisiana, you're flying to Albany, you're flying to Portland. It doesn't really make much of a difference. They could have put them in the Portland bracket. I think they'd have a decent chance to get out of there, and then maybe you play Iowa in the Final Four. To me, that just would have made more sense.
Yeah, and I live near Albany, and I came to Louisiana, and I can tell you that's no fun trip either. Exactly. So, yeah, it's out of both men's and women's brackets, the most surprised I was on anything is that LSU wasn't a 2 seed. Maybe I don't follow the women's game quite as closely, and it wasn't a surprise to some, but I kind of thought they were locked in to a 2. So when I heard that they were a 3, I was really surprised by that.
I'll just say this. You don't necessarily want to give Kim Mulkey and Angel Reese to have a chip to put on their shoulder. So, I mean, if you wanted to do that, then you were successful. Gabe says the committee's reasoning was awful. They made the Albany 2 bracket so hard just because they, quote unquote, had to spread out the Pac-12 teams. I mean, you didn't necessarily see them spreading out the SEC teams in the men's side of the bracket. So, yeah, I agree with you. I agree with that statement. But do you, and I know you're not as adept in the women's game, but do you think the same as I do? I mean, South Carolina to be beat, I think would be even more massive upset than UConn getting beat.
Yeah, this is the most women's basketball I've watched was the last 2 years. I've really, and I like it.
I agree.
I think they let them have way more fun than the men's. I mean,
I agree.
I watched the men's game and somebody did the too short thing and they called a technical. I'm watching the women's game. They're doing throat slashes. They're pointing to the bench. I mean, I think it's fun to watch and I'm interested in this tournament, but from what I've seen, there is nobody. I put that LSU South Carolina game kind of like the St. John's UConn game. St. John's couldn't play any better, and they still lost to UConn. LSU played great the 2 games I watched, and they just couldn't get there because South Carolina's too good. I would be really surprised. Listen, I'm hoping it's Iowa, and I'll be honest, I'm hoping it's Iowa and South Carolina. I'd like to see what the spread is in that game. I'd like to see the public bet Iowa down a little bit for me, and I will hammer South Carolina in that matchup.
I think South Carolina would absolutely, and I use the term wipe the floor too often, but I think they would wipe the floor with Iowa.
Yeah,
that's just my
I think LSU would have a better chance of beating them than Iowa.
And I honestly think that LSU is the only team in the entire bracket that can even,
because they know them, they're not afraid of them. It's similar to Creighton and UConn.
Absolutely.
Last year when I had that futures, I was like, man, just get me to UConn, we'll have a chance. This is the only team because of the familiarity. They're not scared of UConn. Yeah. LSU is the same way. Listen, they'll play South Carolina 10 times in a row. They don't care.
I'm saying in the men's tournament, give me McNeese and Michigan State. I mean, they played each other already. McNeese could win the national championship. I'm going a little too far. All right, we've gone over the time that we were supposed to go, and I appreciate you going so in depth because I find this stuff fascinating. All this information, I'm telling you, this is stuff that this is as good a stuff as you'll get on any national show anywhere. I'm not just saying that. I fully mean that. So I appreciate you going through stuff as in depth as you have. Let's real quick talk about the Pelicans, and I hate putting them at the end here, but we'll talk about them more later in the week. A month until the playoffs start. They're inching up on the Clippers now, even though they remain 6 back. The Clippers lost to the Hawks last night pretty badly, actually. And we saw the Pels were able to beat the Clippers, win 3 out of 4 in the season series against them. What do you think about this Pelicans team? I can tell you what. I guarantee you that there are a lot of teams that hope they don't get matched in the same bracket as the Pelicans.
Yeah, I'm like most people with football. Everybody waits for football to end, then they get into basketball. Yeah. I really get into the NBA after the college season ends because I'm just so into the college game every night. But from what I've seen from NBA that I've watched so far, I think the Pelicans are very interesting in the West. They're really starting to play well. I like the pieces they have. And when I watch these other teams, we'll just take Denver out of it because they're Denver and they
exactly.
But outside of that, like you look at these teams that you have up here. I mean, you're telling me the Pelicans can't beat any of those teams?
I think they can
You know,
beat
I think
anyone.
OKC's having a great year, but I think that's one of those teams where we're all sitting there going, "Oh, yeah, I know," but when the playoffs start, we'd like to have them as the 1 seed, right? You know, Minnesota's another team like that. I think the Pelicans, when it's all said and done, could be the second best team in the West behind Denver.
Yeah, and if the Pels look like they're on a trajectory to finish either 4 or 5, and if you do finish 4 or 5, you want Oklahoma City as the 1 seed. Yep. You don't want to play have to play Denver until the NBA Western Conference Finals. But I will say this, and I've said this almost every show the past 2 weeks, and I'm going to say it again because the odds I don't get this whatsoever. This is DraftKings. Now, most places the Pels are like plus 6,000 to win the NBA championship. At DraftKings, it has not budged in weeks, and I don't get it. The Pelicans keep winning, and they don't change their odds. To me, not saying the Pelicans are going to win the NBA championship, but I'm saying you're not going to find a better value in the entire NBA than the New Orleans Pelicans at plus 2,800 to win the conference championship, at plus 7,500 to win the NBA championship.
Yeah, I agree. Those are the best numbers on the board right now.
Just crazy. By the way, breaking news from Gabe Henderson: Leighton Vander Esch just medically retired. I mean, that's worthy of repeating out there.
Yeah.
My friend
that doesn't surprise me. He's had all kinds of issues there in Dallas, so he probably just and he's got issues that aren't like just a torn ACL. It's stuff that could get progressively worse. So that makes sense.
He always had problems. Like I mean, I'm sure I don't have the stats in front of me. I'm sure he's played a full season before, but it seemed like almost he's definitely had more injury-plagued seasons than non-injury-plagued seasons. So Dallas Cowboys linebacker Leighton Vander Esch, as D Squared used to call him on the show when we first started, Vander Beek. He hated that guy. I don't know why he hated him so much, but whatever. I guess he did well against the Saints. All right, Thomas, thank you so much for coming on. And again, going so in depth with these picks. To me, I'm always looking for some insight, and you had some great insight. Tell everybody where else they can see. I know Sportsline. When are you going on the next Sportsline show? Because I'm going to want to watch that.
Yeah, I'm doing a preview, like a futures preview at 3 Eastern time on Monday at Sportsline, and then I have some college basketball picks over there that I do, and I'll also have a bunch of stuff here for NOLA.com. I'll have first round upsets, I'll have bracket busters, teams to fade, and then every day I'll have my best bets articles up here for the entire tournament. Bet.nola.com. Again, I'm not just saying this. I know sometimes we throw stuff and we throw out hyperbole, but no one has been hotter that I've seen across the entire nation than Tom Casale. So you can find him at the Tom Casale on X/Twitter. And he also goes and improves my paycheck every 2 weeks. Not that I'm biased or anything, but I'm just saying that's a good thing. Tom, thanks so much for spending an hour or so with me, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care.
Tom Casale on the NCAA tournament and beyond. Again, man, some great information. And I'm telling you, bet.nola.com. He's going to have stuff all over there telling you everything we just talked about and then some. And as the tournament goes along and you're looking for maybe some plays to make, and I know a lot of these sites now, you can also go on and play second chance brackets. Like after the first round's gone, you think your bracket's busted, you want to have some fun, you can also do second chance brackets. Tom's going to help you out with that. All right, before we go off the air today, it's time for my extra point. And my extra point was easy today. It's Scotty Scheffler. I know many of you out there aren't huge golf fans, but you don't have to appreciate what the world's overwhelming number one player, Scotty Scheffler, did yesterday at Sawgrass and what he's done over the course of the past 2 years. He won the Players' Championship for the second consecutive year, something no player had ever done before in the 50-year history of this tournament. Not Tiger Woods, not Jack Nicklaus, none of them. They've never done it. He also won for the second consecutive week on the PGA Tour, which also is pretty damn rare. And he didn't just win Sunday. He won after starting the day 5 shots behind Xander Schauffele, and by shooting a 64 to finish at 20 under. The best final round ever by a man who won the tournament. I joked his odds going into Sunday were absurd. They were still around 11-1. And then later on, before that, he had same odds as his pre-tournament odds, 5.5-1 before the third round, even though he could barely finish round 2 with an injured neck. Did you watch any of that? He could barely move his neck. Every time he swung the club, he was wincing in pain. I was joking about it. You know what? Goes to show Vegas is not going to let anyone win any real money on Scheffler as long as he remains on this sort of pace. Also goes to show how good this dude really is. While it's still too early maybe to put him on the same plane as Jack Nicklaus and especially the GOAT, Tiger Woods, it's not too early to say he could soon be right there with those legends. Although, if you're a sports bettor or a regular DFS player, you're probably not a big fan because he's usually going to ruin your card. He ruined mine this week, but look, I still appreciate him for what he is, and that is by far, it's not close, the best player in golf and probably will continue to be. We'll see what he does here as we about to go in the majors. The Masters is coming up next month. In fact, it's only a few weeks away. The Masters is the first major of the year, although some people say now that the Players' Championship has made it to that level, they are the quote-unquote fifth major, even though there really isn't such a thing. All right, I know you're tired of hearing me talk about golf. That is going to wrap it up for this Monday morning. I sincerely want to thank my guest, Tom Casale, and all his expertise. We hope you can join us on Wednesday. We'll probably talk a little bit more NCAA tournament. We're going to talk about the Saints. We're going to talk about LSU baseball a little bit because we've kind of ignored that going down. We're going to bring in Matt Moscona of ESPN Radio. We're also going to have Spencer the Guru in for his weekly fantasy roundup segment. A reminder to subscribe to our Dattitude YouTube page. You know, it's real easy. You sign on in your Gmail account or whatever. You go to YouTube, you log in, and you click subscribe. That's all you've got to do. It's at Dattitude Pod. You can find it. If I can find it, if my wife can find it, you can find it. Just a reminder to subscribe. Click the little bell to receive notifications, and when we go on the air, you will know it, and you will know when we go on live, or you can watch after the fact, whatever you want. And all the great shorts that we're doing, Gabe Henderson is cutting out clips of the show. I'm trying to do daily shorts or more of them starting. I did some over the weekend. You can go check those out. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. And I promise I won't stutter when I do the podcast. You can find a replay of the show on NOLA.com/sports. That will do it. We will see you on Wednesday. Take it easy, my friends.
If you're looking for the latest scoop and in-depth interviews on the Saints, the NFL, the Pelicans, LSU, along with the best bets of the week, then lucky you. Along with high-powered, in-the-know guests who cover our teams, Jim Derry brings plenty of Dattitude. And he'll always tell you the way it is, or at least the way he thinks it is.